Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a figure who is, for many, one of history's great heroes, King David. And we are putting his story under a completely different kind of microscope.
That's right.
We're going to move way beyond the familiar Sunday school narrative.
Yeah.
The sources you brought today ask us to look at David as a masterful and often, well, ruthless political operator.
That's the mission, really. The source material we're digging into, it doesn't pull any punches. It argues that our traditional sanitized view of David isn't just a simple mistake.
No.
It calls it a profound misunderstanding that has had, and this is the key, catastrophic historical consequences. We're talking about how this heroic image was later used to fuel things like Christian imperialism and to justify colonial wars.
Wow. All based on what the source says is a flawed foundation.
Utterly flawed, according to them.
Okay, let's just jump right in because the language here is frankly shocking from the get-go. It talks about David's time in exile as involving unpardonable sins. It mentions him seeking political asylum with the Philistines and then engaging in ruthless plundering of minority villages. And not just once or twice. It says this went on for 16 months.
16 months, and if you really let that sink in, a year and a half of systematic raiding, it changes the character from a righteous fugitive to something more like a warlord.
Right. And the source argues this was all part of a very deliberate calculation. This wasn't just about survival.
Exactly. It was about funding his next move. You see that clearly in how he used the loot from those raids.
That's the part that really stood out to me. The very large bribes. And the text really emphasizes the word large, that he gave to the elders of Hebron.
Yes, this wasn't charity.
No, it was a political investment. He was using criminally acquired money to secure support for his eventual power grab.
Precisely. And we have to talk about his army during this time. I mean, this is crucial. David wasn't just some lone guy hiding in a cave.
He had a serious following.
He had hundreds of men, a private military force. And the source is blunt about this. Leading an active army while King Saul is still on the throne. That's treason. It's an act of national destabilization.
So he wasn't just waiting for God's timing. He was actively forcing the issue, escalating the conflict himself.
That's the argument. He was building the power base to take what he believed was his.
And this creates such a stark contrast with how Saul dies. I mean, the source describes Saul's death as a glorious death.
On the front lines, yes. Fighting the Philistines alongside his son Jonathan. He died defending the nation.
While David was in exile, bribing elders with plunder. It's a really uncomfortable juxtaposition. The founding king dies, protecting the unified country, and the successor is carving out his own piece of it.
And that leads directly to the next phase, his move to Hebron.
The traditional story is so clean, isn't it? David asks God, should I go back? And God says, yes, go to Hebron. Simple.
Well, the source is deeply skeptical of that. They suggest two possibilities. Either that story of divine instruction is a later addition,
A bit of good PR.
or if a prophecy did happen, it was a false oracle, probably coming from the priest Abiathar, who was, firmly in David's camp. The source insists that David's actions tell you what his real motives were.
And his actions. He didn't exactly arrive like a humble servant, did he?
Not even close. He marched into Hebron with his whole battle-hardened army. He basically positioned his military force to intimidate the very same leaders he'd just bribed.
So the source calls it what was the term?
A military dictatorship.
Okay.
That he used force to coerce the elders into making him king. The coronation wasn't a celebration, it was a transaction backed by an army.
And the immediate result of this power play was a national fracture. He's crowned king, but only over the tribe of Judah, the south.
Yes. He essentially triggers a civil war. This is what the source calls the greatest tragedy a nation can endure. By accepting the crown of just one part of the kingdom, he knowingly chose division over unity.
So Saul's son, Ishbosheth, is made king in the north, and now David has his southern kingdom. But obviously, that wasn't the end goal.
No, the goal was always the whole thing. But the South was weaker, smaller, he couldn't win a straight-up fight.
So what was the strategy?
Systematic destabilization. The source says he initiated constant guerrilla warfare, just endless fighting. He kept provoking the North.
So the idea is to just wear them down, bleed them out financially and politically.
Exactly, and the source is very explicit. The North was not the aggressor. David was constantly instigating these conflicts to exhaust them, to make them desperate for any kind of stability.
And this constant state of war, it creates a power vacuum, right?
Absolutely. The northern king, Ishbosheth, was weak. So the real power shifted to his military commander, Abner. Abner becomes this warlord, the true strongman in the north.
And Abner makes a critical mistake.
A fatal one. He takes Rizpah, a woman who had belonged to the late King Saul.
Okay, and this is more than just a scandal.
Oh, much more. In that culture, the king's harem was a symbol of the throne itself. Taking one of his women was a nonverbal way of saying, I am claiming the royal power. It was a direct move to usurp the throne.
Which, of course, just adds to the chaos in the north and opens the door for David.
It does, and we see this political chess game accelerate. Abner and David actually start negotiating in secret to unite the kingdom.
So there was already plotting going on between them.
Yes, but before the deal is done, Abner is assassinated by David's own commander, Joab. And with Abner gone, the north loses its only capable leader.
And Ishbosheth the king is next.
He's killed soon after by his own men. The whole northern leadership is just decapitated. And the source argues this entire collapse was the direct result of David's strategy of endless, exhausting civil war. He just let them bleed out from the inside.
So the northern elders, facing total chaos, they finally come to David.
They do. But it's not a warm welcome. The source points out that they make him king only under a contractual agreement.
With conditions?
Strict conditions. They say our will must not be defied. It shows he had no real popular support there. He was accepted as, a necessary evil to restore order, not as a beloved leader.
And this is where we see public opinion really sour on him.
Precisely. The sources draw this sharp contrast. Saul was chosen by all the people. But David's standing, it deteriorated over time. The people saw the scheming, the betrayals, the assassination.
And the ultimate proof of this, according to the source, is his own son's rebellion, Absalom's revolt.
Yes, and they argue this wasn't just some palace drama. They say Absalom rebelled because he could no longer tolerate his father's actions.
But the real evidence isn't just Absalom's motive, it's the public's reaction.
Exactly. When Absalom rebelled, the source notes that the entire nation of Israel sided with him. David, the sitting king, had to flee Jerusalem barefoot.
Wow.
That universal defection is presented as irrefutable proof that public opinion had completely turned against him.
This just flips the whole narrative on its head, from a divinely appointed king to a successful but ruthless warlord. So what is the core lesson the source wants us to take from this?
The thesis is that a true king, one appointed by God, should have waited. He should have practiced self-discipline and allowed events to unfold. Instead, David raised an army, forced a civil war, and bribed his way to the top. A king's job is to unify, not fracture the nation for his own gain.
And the source has some pretty strong words for why this critical view has been ignored for so long.
It does. It says the heroic David narrative is so entrenched that many people have become what it calls religious fanatics or zealots, who just refuse to see the facts in the text.
And they go even further. They suggest this isn't just poor reading skills?
No, this is where the argument becomes very theological. The source attributes this stubbornness to the influence of a spirit of falsehood. The idea is that the devil uses religious certainty to block critical understanding.
And they compare it to the scribes and Pharisees in Jesus' time. So certain in their interpretation that they couldn't see the truth right in front of them.
It's a very provocative comparison, meant to shake the reader out of complacency.
So for anyone listening, the source is basically saying, go check the primary documents for yourself.
Absolutely. It encourages you to compare the accounts in the books of Samuel, which are much more raw and critical, with the later accounts in the Book of Chronicles.
Which is more of a polished, sanitized version?
Exactly. Chronicles was written much later, and it omits a lot of the dirty political details to present a more unified, heroic national story. Samuel is much closer to the messy reality.
It's deeply confusing because almost every sermon, every children's book is based on that heroic narrative.
It is, and that's why this is such a powerful analysis. But you need to know, after discussing all of this, the massacres, the bribery, the civil war, the source ends this section with a final warning.
Okay.
It says that everything we've talked about so far, these are just the minor issues.
The minor issues.
Yes. The cost of his ambition. What David does next as king in his personal life, that, they say, is what is truly unforgivable.
That is a dark place to leave it. So for you listening, what's the takeaway from all this right now?
After seeing this case for David the political schemer, the real challenge is to ask yourself the source's ultimate question. When you look at these powerful figures in Scripture, are you operating from true insight? Or are you influenced by preconceived notions that might be, misleading? Answering that for yourself is maybe the first step in breaking the historical cycle of justifying ruthless actions in the name of a higher cause.